Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 199. We are going to take a look at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement. Big old long title, but it's going to be short and sweet. But before we dive in, let me give a big shout out to my listeners because it's good to see you guys here. A big shout out to Texas, Oklahoma, New York, and California. In terms of countries, the United States and the Russian Federation. Okay, so again, this one is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement, also known as NOAAOLE. A little bit of background. So this is a law enforcement, I would say, branch within the federal government. A little bit of the agency overview. This particular agency under this name was formed in 1970, but the founding and the beginnings of this go back to like 1930. The preceding agency was the Division of Law Enforcement, U.S. Fish Commission, and Bureau. That one is the original one that goes back to 1930. As of 2011, they have over 200 employees. So as far as I can tell, these are federal employees with federal benefits. I do not know if they are in a union. In terms of law enforcement, they enforce federal law, not state law. I'm assuming that if there are any laws that are breaking state laws, that they would report that to wherever that jurisdiction is, wherever the crime is taking place. In terms of headquarters, they are located in Silver Springs, Maryland. Their parent agency is the National Marine Fisheries Service. In terms of having divisions, they have 5 different offices throughout the United States and territories. There's the Northeast, Southeast, Alaska, West Coast, and Pacific Islands. And in terms of field offices, they have about 52 field offices, which isn't that many considering that the United States is pretty large and our environment is very diverse. But it's one of those things, this is not a huge agency. It's not like the EPA. So I hope that they don't overspend. I don't see anything in terms of budget. It doesn't tell me what exactly their budget is or what exactly it is spent on. I hope it's not waste and fraud, but who knows. So it says here, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement, also known as NOAAOLE, is a federal police part of the National Marine Fisheries Service of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, headquartered in Silver Spring, Maryland. It was established in 1930 as the Division of Law Enforcement, U.S. Fish Commission and Bureau. It is responsible for the ecosystem protection and conservation of most of the national marine life. It is the only federal agency for such purposes, although that's kind of not true because there is also the Environmental Protection Agency. So one way that the EPA also has a role in this is, for example, if a Superfund site affects ocean life or fisheries or things of that nature, then this is where 2 different federal agencies would be involved. But I'm not really sure how they would determine who would be in charge. I guess it depends on the jurisdiction and exactly what the problem is. So it says here, as I just mentioned, it is divided into 5 divisional offices. It is led by an assistant director and 52 field offices. So it says here, they maintain working relationships with state agencies under cooperative enforcement agencies, mispronouncing that and not using the right word, cooperative enforcement agreements, I'm so used to seeing agencies on here. Their partners include Alabama, Alaska, American Samoa, California, the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Delaware, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Guam, Hawaii, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. Now, in terms of laws and statutes that are enforced, these are really interesting. I did not know that they had so many, but I can understand why, because the United States is a large and diverse, I would say, country, continent, and environment. So it's very important to protect what we have. So that way we do have something to pass down to our children and to future generations. So the first one is the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. I guess what we'll do is we will go back and discuss these individually, because if I go through every single one of them right now in detail, this episode will be like 12 or 18 hours long, and I think that's a little ridiculous. The next one is the Sustainable Fisheries Act of 1996. Then there's the High Seas Drift Net Act of 1992. Next one is the Endangered Species Act of 1973. The next one is the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. Next one is the Lacey Act Amendments of 1983. Next one is the Marine Sanctuaries Act. Next one is Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary and Protection Act. Next one is the American Fisheries Act of 1998. Next one is Certificate of Legal Origin for, I think it's anadromous fish products. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word because I've never seen it before. The next one is Antarctic Conservation Act of 1978. Next one is Antarctic Marine Living Resources Convention Act of 1984. Next one is Antarctic Protection Act of 1990. Next one is Atlantic Coastal Fisheries Cooperative Management Act. Next one is the Atlantic Tunas Convention Act of 1975. Next one is the Atlantic Salmon Convention Act of 1982. Next one is the Atlantic Striped Bass Conservation Act of 1984. Some of these say Convention Act. I bet they're supposed to be Conservation Act. So whoever wrote some of this is not really knowing what they're talking about. And I'll go back and double check that word because it does say convention, but I bet it's supposed to be conservation. So learn as we go, right? Next one is Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act of 1980. Next one is Dolphin Protection Consumer Information Act. Next one is DriftNet Impact Monitoring Assessment and Control Act. Next one is Eastern Pacific Tuna Licensing Agreement Act of 1984. Next one is Fish and Seafood Promotion Act. Next one is Fishermen's Protective Act of 1967. Next one is the Fur Seal Act Amendments of 1983. Next one is High Seas Fishing Compliance Act. Next one is Land Remote Sensing Policy Act of 1992. Next one is Northern Pacific, I'm going to mispronounce this, Anadromous Stocks Convention Act of 1992. That might be Conservation Act. I need to double check that. Next one is Northern Pacific Halibut Act of 1982. Next one is Ocean Thermal Energy Conservation Act of 1980. Next one is Pacific Salmon Treaty Act of 1985. Next one is Shark Finning Prohibition Act. I actually agree with that because I saw a very disturbing video. I think it's by some .org company or .org nonprofit. It's Ocean something, but it's a really large organization that helps to protect the wildlife in the ocean. I guess ocean life, I should say. Animals in the ocean. And they showed this horrific footage of these fisheries that are overfishing in the ocean for shark fins. So like whenever you go to a supplement store and you're buying supplements for cartilage, like to repair your bones or cartilage, and it comes from shark fins, that's where this is coming from. And so this really horrible video shows this large ship owned by whatever company, I can't remember the name. They've got all these workers on the boat, right? And they have these huge nets and they're catching all these sharks and they pick them up out of the water in the net. They grab them by their fin and pull them out of the net and then they slice off, I think it's the dorsal fin, and they maybe slice off a couple other fins that they actually need to survive and to swim, and they throw them back into the ocean. It was so horrific and there was so much blood on this boat. And I thought, if you're going to defin a shark, you might as well just keep the whole fish and use it for meat or bait or something else. Like, use the whole fish, but don't throw it back. I think that's very cruel. But I think it's horrible to be overfishing like this because, as you know, if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that I am from Oklahoma. I'm based out of Oklahoma City at this point. And here in Oklahoma, yes, we have hunting and fishing, but for the most part, I would say most of the people that I know personally, they only hunt to actually feed their families and things like that. Like, I don't know very many people that go out and hunt deer or fish just to mount it on the wall. I think that was very common way back in the day, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I think that was very common, and I think that's very cruel. But most of the people that I know, they fish out of necessity, or they hunt out of necessity. Like, they may, shoot a deer or a buck and that meat will supply them, with protein for, I don't know, a month or two, if not longer. So needless to say, I think that if they're going to have companies that, I would say, hunt or fish for sharks and they want the cartilage from their fins, just take out the whole fish, because it's just going to die and rot in the ocean anyway, but don't overfish. It was really gross. And I'm not like a EPA nut. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not progressive. I'm not liberal. I mean, I personally think that I just practice common sense. I think that, you shouldn't catch and kill something unless you're actually going to consume it or use it for something. I don't think it should be for just for business or for hobbies. I don't agree with that. And so, needless to say, it was a very weird video. I did not like it, and it really shocked me. I was horrified because, I didn't know that that's how they were fishing for shark cartilage. I thought they were just going to use every bit of the fish and maybe use the meat to feed somebody, something like that. No, they're just ripping these sharks apart, cutting off their fins graphically and gruesomely, and then just throwing them back in the ocean. I mean, that is just sick. And again, I'm not an environmentalist. I just think we need to practice common sense and be good stewards of what God has given us. Because when I was watching that video, I just thought that's one of the most ungodly things I've seen in a long time, especially happening to wildlife. Like, God did create this planet. He did create the solar system, the universe, everything in it. So He gave all this to us, human beings, because we were made in His image. And what He gave us is a gift. So whenever someone gives you something, you don't destroy it. That's what it means to be a good steward. Like, you don't destroy what someone gives you like that. So I just wish that there was more respect and honor. And I think one of the problems, and this is a little bit of a side note, I think one of the problems why we have this issue is because I think we have way too many atheists in business. And I'm not against atheists or agnostics per se. But, what's interesting is that when people don't believe in God, they basically do whatever they want. Unless, someone finds a way to make sure that they go to jail. Like, it's unless they're breaking the law or unless the law is passed and it takes effect retroactively. But I've just noticed that there are so many people that own these companies that are corrupt, evil, and wicked. And they don't care what they do to people. They don't care what they do to the planet. They don't care what they do to animals whatsoever. And I'm just like, this is not how things used to be. The United States used to be, I would say, predominantly Christian because we were founded by Christians. But the further we get away from God, the more this weird, really barbaric stuff happens that you would think would never happen in the United States. So if there's anyone listening in other countries, which I know that you are, I think we have over 26 countries listening in, if not more than that. And so just FYI, just because, we are the United States, that doesn't mean that we're perfect. I mean, we're not extremely flawed, but, I really wish that everyone in their own country would work on what needs to be done there to make their country great and successful. As I said, the United States is not perfect. But I think we could get a whole lot better, and I think the trajectory of the United States would have been completely different in terms of our history if more people had been Christian or stayed Christian. But there are so many people, and again, this is a side note, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, not by any means. But I just feel like a lot of people have left the church. And when I say the church, I don't just mean one particular denomination. I think a lot of people have left Christianity because they're sick of the shaming and the blaming and the horse manure. And I could use a totally different word, but, I told God that I would work on my language. And so, I think there's only so much people can take in terms of religiosity and indoctrination, and especially false indoctrination and just these stupid theologies that are not even from God. Theology is not from God. It's from mankind. I'm not saying that all theology is bad, but all I know, because I used to be Catholic for a while, went through that phase and left, all I know is that before a guy went to seminary, he was normal. He was a normal, kind person. Hands down, every single seminarian that I've known over the years, They were normal young men before they went to the seminary. Or the cemetery is what we call it, because you basically go there to die to yourself, and then you're not even who God has called you to be anymore, and you're just brainwashed. I kid you not, priest after priest, or seminarian after seminarian, once they come out of, I was going to say theology, once they come out of seminary, they are screwed up, messed up, hateful, horrible people, and just like woman haters, and I'm just like, what was done to these men? It just is so weird to me. So I think that if you have a son and they're thinking about going to seminary, like Catholic seminary, do not let them go. Encourage them to not be a priest. I would encourage them to not be Catholic and be who God wants them to be. Because all I know is that people go into seminary one way and they come out completely different. It's almost like when people go to law school. Like I've known people over the years, they were normal people before they went to law school, and then when they got out of law school, they were the most corrupt, evil, wicked people I had ever known. And I was like, it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So my point is this, that I think that the trajectory of the United States could have been better if we had remained Christian, and if we actually practiced the original doctrine of Christianity, which is not Catholicism, it's not Russian Orthodox, it's not Eastern Orthodox, like, the Catholic Church, they say that they are the original church. They are not. The original church is Jesus Christ. Hence his name Jesus Christ, and we are Christians because we believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So I think so many people, one of the reasons why they have abandoned their faith, and I encourage you not to do that. I know that I have abandoned my faith, a couple times throughout my life. And I didn't realize that I had abandoned it till I really thought about it. And I was like, wow, I really just kind of gave up. Like I was still a Christian and I still believed in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, but I didn't go to church. I didn't like Christians. I couldn't stand them. I just didn't like the hypocrisy. And what I didn't realize was that, whenever people are bad Christians, that's not a reflection of Jesus. That's a reflection of the person that's not practicing the right kind of faith. And so my personal opinion is that a lot of people have left Christianity, different denominations within Christianity, because they're sick and tired of the brainwashing, they're sick and tired of the lies that are just browbeaten over them from bad people put in charge of these churches, and I completely get it. I totally understand, and I agree with you. Like, I left church for a long time. It's like off and on, off and on. And so it was one of those things, I think we are all seekers in a way because we're trying to find something that sustains us, heals us, comforts us, and, just knowing that we are created in the image of God, that we shouldn't give up. Well, here's the thing. My personal opinion is that one of the reasons why we have some really shady stuff going on in the United States is because we have a lot of people that are not Christian anymore. They've given up and they've walked away and they said, oh, well, there's corruption in that church. I'm just not going to be Christian. No, like, as a Christian believer, you call out the corruption and you correct it. You say, hey, this is not Christ-like. This is not what we are supposed to be doing. What I find very interesting, and this is just a side note, a lot of people went back to church right after 9/11 happened. And I just thought, how sad is that? That it takes a terrorist attack on the United States for people to wake up and realize they need God in their life. We need God in our life regardless of what happens or what doesn't happen. That's the whole point, really, or one of the biggest points of being a Christian and being a Christ-filled believer is that you put God first no matter your circumstances. Like, it shouldn't take a catastrophe to get people to wake up. Like, for example, when COVID-19 happened, which I thought it was stupid. You're probably thinking, well, how can an epidemic or pandemic be stupid? Well, how people behaved and reacted. What I found very interesting with COVID-19 is that, here in Oklahoma, we typically have a very high rate of flu season. Like, we have a lot of people that die from it and a lot of people that contract it. And one of the reasons why that happens here in Oklahoma is we have a lot of people that don't wash their hands, which is sick. There's a lot of people I'm not friends with because they're not sanitary. I'm like, you moron and you idiot. All you have to do is buy a bar of soap and wash your hands. Or just always wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. It's just disgusting what people do. Both men and women, it's not just children. But get this, one of the reasons why children can be so gross and disgusting is because of their parents. And I'm not anti-child, not by any means. I think children are wonderful, especially well-behaved ones. It's just that if they're not being brought up correctly, then they're going to behave just like their parents, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So anyway, what I found to be really weird and it just irritated, it just bothered me. It's like people didn't care to wash their hands until like it took an epidemic to get them to wash their hands. So whenever COVID-19 happened and people started, hoarding antibacterial hand gel and soap and all this stuff and Lysol and Windex and bleach and all that stuff, guess what? We basically had no flu cases. No one was dying from the flu. Why? Because people were doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were washing their hands and they were staying home when they were sick. See, here in Oklahoma, we are what is called an at-will state, which I can't stand. I don't like that. But I'm also not a fan of huge labor unions, so I'm kind of like right there in the middle. We need to have the best of both worlds, and it is possible to do that. But the only way you can have the best of both worlds is to have democracy, freedom, and capitalism. Otherwise, none of it will work. But anyway, what I found to be really irritating was, our flu cases went down because people started caring. And it's like, wow, so, here in Oklahoma, as I just said, we are an at-will state, so I can remember so many times when I was younger, and I'm not old, but when I was younger, employers would threaten you with a job firing if you didn't show up to work, even if you were sick. Like there was one time I had a stomach bug. I was vomiting. This was several years ago. And my employer threatened to fire me. I was like, look, I am vomiting at home. I can't come in. It's just, I can't even stand up. Like I'm hugging the toilet. And so here's the thing. That's how employers are in at-will states. At least pre-COVID-19, they were like that. It's like, you're going to show up and do this job no matter what, or you're fired. Well, guess what? That spread disease. Not just the flu, but the stomach virus, TB, pneumonia. I mean, all this stuff. It's just like, wow. So I just find it very interesting that it took a pandemic to get employers to wake up that you can't be forcing people and threatening people with job loss just to try and get them to go to work. Like, that's not appropriate. Like, if you actually cared about your workers, when they're sick, they're sick. And if their kid is sick and they need to stay home and take care of them, guess what? They need to stay home and take care of them. It's not against the law. It's not a sin. It's not immoral. But you know what is against the law? These employers that threaten job loss to employees that are ill. That's against the law. It's against federal law. And here's another thing. These employers that pull these, really bad shenanigans with their employees, guess what? It is morally wrong, meaning it is immoral. So I can't tell you how many employers I've had over the years that they acted like my employment was solely based on whether or not I was always healthy, never got sick, never used my health insurance, always had a smile on my mouth, always looked like a peppy cheerleader. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It was disgusting to me, like it just sickened me. But you know what's really sad is that, again, it took a pandemic to get employers to wake up to the fact that, hey, we need to work on controlling disease here. And here's the thing. This is not new. Like towards the turn of the century, like there were a couple of flu epidemics that broke out here in the United States. Guess what? Whole towns closed down until the flu ran its course. Like you didn't intimidate your workers and say, hey, you've got to show up to work even if you're sick. Well, guess what? That spreads infection. Like we know about the flu, we know about the plague, and it's like some employers are just, they live in delusionville. It's like, okay, so if the employer gets sick, they get as many days off as they want. But yet when a worker gets sick, it's like, oh, sorry, you only have so much on vacation time or paid leave. You know what happened to me one time? And I'll say this before I move on with this article. Oh, this made me so mad. But I was so sick I couldn't do anything about it. So I got really sick. I was working what used to be a really nice company. And so I got really sick and I used up all and mind you, I hadn't worked there very long, like maybe like a year or two. So I didn't have a whole lot of vacation leave or sick time built up. And so, I was sick. I got really sick. I had to stay home for like a week. And so, I got pulled into basically a reprimand meeting, with my boss and his boss yelled at me and said, "You don't have vacation time or paid leave to pay for this." I was like, "Okay." Then you just don't pay me for when I wasn't here, that's all. And he just goes, "What?" I was like, "Well, look, I wasn't here, I didn't clock in, so you just don't pay me for what I didn't work. You only pay me for what I did work." I was like, I understand I haven't worked here very long and I don't have, any vacation pay hardly built up or sick leave. I was like, when people get sick, they just need to stay home. And hey, if it cuts into my paycheck, it cuts into my paycheck. I was like, that's just how it is. That's how things work in the real world. And so this guy, he got so mean with me. And my boss did nothing to protect me. He was a jerk, and whatever word you want to use from the pit of hell. And so, his boss says, "Well, I'm going to need you to sign a piece of paper here stating that you understand that we're not going to pay you for you not being here and that you didn't have enough sick time or paid leave to pay for this." I was like, "Okay." I was like, it's just wages. Like, I'm not going to have you pay me what I didn't work. So I had to sign this paper, and I was like, what is wrong with this nut? Like, it was weird. And I was thinking to myself, okay, why isn't HR handling this? Like, normally I don't like HR, but this guy, wow. He got angry that I used up what little vacation pay I had, and then I used up my sick leave because I was really sick. I mean, I think I was sick, I was probably a week, if not a little bit longer. So I didn't have much to use, and so I guess he was mad that I used up what I did have to help supplement my income, but that's just there for workers to use. Like, I am a really good worker, and so I don't take off just for anything. Like, usually it's got to be really serious, like I'm sick or I'm going to a doctor's appointment or things like that. And so this guy, it's like he didn't want me using anything for anything. And he was mad that one of my checks actually did have paid sick leave in it, but I was sick. And it was documented. And I was like, okay. And then he continued to lecture me about how I don't have any sick leave. I don't have any sick leave now. I was like, okay. I was like, I'll just accrue it again. And he got angry about that. I was like, I almost want to say, dude, calm down. But I just said, what's the problem? I was like, this is how paid sick leave works. You build it up. You accrue it. The longer you work here, the more you have. And I was like, and you just use what you have. And if you don't have enough, if you have to stay home sick, you stay home sick, but you just get a cut in your pay for that week or whatever, however much time you didn't work is whatever you're not paid for. I was like, that's just how it works with payroll. Oh my gosh, this guy got so mad. I was just like, what a nut. So, it's just really one of those things that, like I said, the United States is not perfect, but especially Bible Belt states and at-will states, which typically at-will states tend to be Bible Belt states. And, I use this example as, this is what happens whenever you have, I don't know if he was Christian, but I know my other boss was supposedly. But this is what happens when you have people that make the church look bad. They've got their morals and values, but then when it comes to your pain, your suffering, it's like they just get a wheelbarrow of hate, shame, and blame, and they just dump all this horse manure on you, and you're like, whoa, like, this is not appropriate. And here's the thing, when I came back to work, I actually came back to work too soon, but I was like, well, I don't want to take off too much work because I was kind of scared I was going to lose my job. Well, I guess, I had every right to think that way because this guy was a nut. So I came back to work too soon. I was still physically weak. Like, I wasn't contagious or anything, but I was still very physically weak. And so I went back to work way too soon. I didn't feel that good. And then the moment I get back to work, these two jerks, they're trying to pull something with, like, my pay and my future benefits or things like that. And I'm like, this is why HR handles stuff like this, because these two guys, they were just, I don't know what was wrong with them. But needless to say, they very much got paid a lot of money. And what I find very interesting is that they make a lot of money and they get way more vacation pay and paid sick time off or whatever than me, and yet they shame and blame me for getting sick and then using what I have accrued, like what I worked for. But yet, these two guys, they went on vacations all the time. All the time. So it's kind of like, wow, so you have the higher up executives that just think that they can treat the underlings however they want and treat them like garbage and crap, and it's like, okay, that's not appropriate, it's very cruel. It's like, okay, I so want to tell this jerk, I was like, I didn't ask to get sick. I so want to say, do you think I like missing work? I was like, I also want to say, do you think I like not earning a living? Like, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. But anyway, my point is this. Their behavior was not Christ-like. Not at all. Not at all, but yet they were both married. I know one had kids, the other one did not. I think he was too selfish to have kids. But anyway, here's the thing. They were both married. Like, they both participate in the sacrament of marriage. One had a family, one did not. It's like, okay, you know what's very hypocritical to me? Is whenever you have people that are in charge, that are managers, they're supposed to be a leader and a mentor and I would say an example to people that they manage. But also when you're married, how do I describe this? I put it this way, because this is what I think about. Whenever someone is married and they treat me like dirt, I'm like, I still think in my head, do you not realize that you participate in the sacrament of marriage and you stood before God and made vows, you and your spouse made vows, but then like once you leave the church, you treat other people like garbage? Like, I don't like it whenever people participate in the sacrament of marriage or any sacrament within the church. And that's not a Catholic thing. Catholics did not, the Catholic Church did not invent marriage or the sacraments. All that comes from God. So if you're attending a church that says, oh, this is what we practice and only we practice it, that's bull. That's bull. Because sacraments come from God. And if it comes from the Holy Bible, it comes from the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's why we have a Judeo-Christian faith. But anyway, I find it to be very irritating and just unacceptable human behavior whenever people are married. They have participated in that sacrament from God, and then they treat people like garbage and just awful. And I just think, here, in my opinion, they're greedy. Because they are participating in a sacrament, and technically a ceremony, that is given to us by God. Because every single one of us is made in His image. But what these higher-ups and some of these snobby executives that are jerks, what they think is, they think that their image in God is more important than everybody that's below them, quote-unquote below them. Just because someone makes less money than someone else doesn't mean that they're subservient. It does not mean that they are a slave. It doesn't mean that they do not have value. But that's how these executives acted, especially these men. And the company that I worked for, they only had one female executive. One. And she was a black widow. She was evil. She was wicked. Like, she was known for being a very dirty employee. Like, she was known for doing very unethical things, and I'm surprised she's not in prison. So here's the thing, like, these cowardly men that make a whole lot of money, way more money than other people at the company, these executives, and I don't think they deserve that money because all they did was stand on the backs of other people. And I witnessed that. Like, I didn't see them do hardly any good work. Like, I think if someone makes a lot of money, it needs to be, the proof needs to be in the pudding that they actually deserve those wages, but these guys did not deserve it. So they were always taking credit for other people's work. Basically, they were always taking credit for people that made like $30,000 or less a year, and then claiming that it was them that did the work, and so it was the higher-ups that got the raises and the promotions and the extra benefits, whereas the lower-income workers did not. It made me so mad. I was like, wow, I do not like being used at all. And I'm not saying that as a feminist because I don't think they were discriminating just against women. It was against anyone that they viewed that was lower than them, whether male or female or whatever, hermaphrodite, who cares, I don't. But it was just across the board discrimination. It was really horrible. So whenever these weak, cowardly executives, whenever they want something shady to go down, let me get a drink of water. Whenever they want something shady to go down, and they didn't have the courage to do whatever they wanted done, whenever they didn't have the courage to do it themselves, they would just pass the hockey puck to this very corrupt woman that was a high up executive, and that's why she was known as the Black Widow, because she was known as just really bad. I'm not going to go into every little thing, but she knows who she is. She knows she's bad. She knows she's unethical, and if she doesn't repent, she'll go to hell. I don't really care either way because I know I'm going to heaven, and I don't act like her. I hated working for her. I actually worked for her for like 3 months or 2 months, and that's all I lasted. It was horrible. Let me get a drink of water. Hold on just a moment. So anyway, what I find very interesting is whenever you have people that make a lot of money, they definitely don't want to get their hands dirty, so they pay somebody else to get their hands dirty, and they typically use women. So if you are a woman listening to this podcast, especially a young woman, do not allow yourself to be used by men. I'm not saying all men are bad, because they're not. The majority of men are actually quite good. It's just that sometimes bad people, whether male or female, whenever they get promoted to positions of power, whatever they are practicing in their daily life is what gets rewarded, and what gets, what's the right wording? It's whatever grows. It's like whatever seed you plant is what will take root. Well, whenever bad people get promoted and get a pat on the back, that's basically society saying, hey, we think what you're doing wrong is great. That's what that is. So just be aware that women get used a lot by men. It's very rare that men get used by women, and I know that's probably going to irritate some men, but here's the thing. Women are much more likely to get taken advantage of in so many ways than men are. That's just how the world is. I don't like it. I hate it. But I've noticed that in our society, even here in the United States, and it saddens me because, the United States, we have the most freedoms. But I will say this, we don't have as much crime and corruption as other countries, but I do think that we can do better, because all I can say is I know what it's like to be discriminated against and be cheated out of my money, out of my pay, and it sucks. And I also know what it's like when someone else that didn't lift a finger gets credit for your work, and then they get a raise, they get the vacation, they get the title, and then you get treated like horse manure. And it's like, wow, thanks a lot. Thanks for nothing. So, for any employers listening, just FYI, this is why employees don't trust you. People know when you promote someone that doesn't deserve to be promoted. And that makes people not respect you or like you. So if you want the respect of your employees, do what's right, even when it sucks. And I say that because I've worked for some places where it's just like a good old boy system. Unfortunately, even though men grow up and they're grown men, sometimes whenever they work with too many guys, it's like it becomes a frat house. Even though it's supposed to be a place of business, it's just like they have this mindset that's just awful. And it's just like, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's just not very professional. And I just think, instead of lowering the bar, we need to raise the bar. Like, we need to raise our standards, not lower them. And that applies to both men and women. But anyway, moving on with this list of laws and statutes that this agency enforces, there is the Shark Finning Prohibition Act, which I definitely agree with. Then you have the South Pacific Tuna Act of 1988. Then you have the Sponge Act of 1906. I don't know what that means, unless they're talking about coral reefs or something. Then you have the it says Convention Act of 1950, but that might be Conservation Act. Then we have the Weather Modifications Reporting Act. And then we have the Whaling, it's either Convention or Conservation Act of 1949. I don't know. Sometimes these are not always written very well, but I will double check those. And we'll just go through them one by one, because I think it's important to recognize the importance of these laws and statutes. I'm sure there's going to be some that I won't agree with, especially if they are geared towards like what the EPA does with punishing people, just for being alive and being on this planet. But I think that, if we have the right mindset of being a good steward of what we have, then I think that's a lot better than not caring at all. But I do want to say this, being that we are supposed to be good stewards, that doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, and just not be responsible, because that just doesn't make sense. I look at it this way. We all have a responsibility to do what's right at our jobs, right? So being that we want to make sure we're doing our best at our job, we should also be doing our best outside our jobs. Like in our home life, in our church life, in our everyday life, whatever the case may be, basically do everything with excellence because, I look at it this way. If you're going to stand for something good. That's what I say. And that is a daily choice. Like I've had to back out of different, I would say, groups or meetings or organizations because I couldn't in good conscience or good faith continue to be a part of something that just didn't sit right. And I've mentioned this before, but there was one organization I joined that it's for women. It's a professional organization, a quote-unquote professional organization. But the more I learned about what they were doing and what they believed in, it was very disturbing to me. Because instead of being pro-women, they were just Marxists. They were very weird. And they believed in intersectionality feminism, which is founded or rooted in Marxism. And it prides itself in that. It prides itself in being Marxist. And I'm like, I'm not a Marxist, so I can't go along with this. Like, I joined this women's group or professional organization for really good reasons. Like, I wanted to help out my community. I wanted to help women and children in my local community in Oklahoma City. And I just felt like the more I got involved in this organization, the more we were losing sight of what's really important. And so everything was just becoming way too political. I'm like, we need to be helping out locally. Like, I'm not interested in LGBTQ propaganda, protocols, policies, procedures, their way of thinking, because that's not how women and children think. That's not right. Like, we need to be taking care of our local community first. We are not supposed to be these political hashtags. Like, people's lives are more important than a political movement. That's just how I view it, because I think there's a lot of work to be done. But here's the thing, if the work doesn't get done, then what are we doing? You know what I mean? And it's just, this organization I was a part of, not very long, I would say, I really had high hopes for it. Because on the surface, everything looked really good. But it's like the more I got involved, the more I volunteered, the more I learned about the organization, the more I realized that, if I stay in this organization and I am a member, a paying member as well, then I'm basically allowing them to put their label on me. Because, whoever you associate with is who you're associated with. And I just thought, if this isn't something that promotes what I believe in, then I can't be a part of it because our beliefs are different. And so one of the reasons that I gave for backing out of this organization was it goes against my religious beliefs, because it does. I do not believe in transgenderism. I do not believe in homosexuality. And I think that this women's group, it was proactively and intentionally welcoming transgender men into our organization. I'm like, they're not women, they're men. I was like, can't women have anything like to themselves? I was like, this is not right. And here's another thing, I try to speak up about this, but there's only so much I can say. But it's like, I don't think they realize that transgender men and homosexual men, they want to lower the age of consent. Meaning to minors. Like, what does that say about our organization? We're supposed to be for women and children. But now we are allowing this subgroup with ill will and bad intentions to infiltrate our women's organization, make it all about them, and then try and get us on their bandwagon. And what really creeped me out was one of the last meetings I went to. There were so many young women in the room, a bunch of them in their 20s, because I'm in my 30s. And there were so many women in their 20s that whenever they would agree with something transgender, they would snap their fingers because that was the way that they clap or whatever. And you could tell that they were definitely promoting it. They believed in it. I'm like, these young women do not understand what they are aligning themselves with. They are aligning themselves with something that is very much attacking the female sex, like women that are actually born female. And it's just like, it's not right to do that. So then it kind of felt like, I could feel the tension in the room because there were some women sitting at my table that we just kind of felt like we couldn't talk openly about hardly anything because everything was political. Everything was about transgenderism, homosexuality. It's like, that's not community. That's not community. And here's the thing, homosexuality, first of all, is wrong and it's ungodly. And it's perverse because they want to lower the age of consent. But here's the thing, it's not appropriate for us to invite people in that have a ulterior motive and do not have the same agenda as us. And here's another thing. Homosexuals are a fraction of the population, right? Like the majority of people in the United States are straight. And the majority of the people in the United States are not transgender, like they just stay who they were born to be. So here's the thing. Being that homosexuals and transgenders are a fraction, like a minuscule amount of the population of the United States, why should we change for them? Like why should we change our thinking or the way we talk, what we do for them? Like usually the majority wins. Like that's typically how life works. And here's another thing. When you have democracy, if you don't agree with someone, it just means you don't agree. But under this radical Marxism, feministic way of thinking these days, it's like, well, if you don't agree with us, then you must be completely against us and you're the problem. And the only way that you're not going to be the problem anymore is to agree with us. Like, you have to change, not us. And it's like, no, like, that's not how freedom of thought works. That's not how freedom of speech works. That's not how democracy works. And that's also not how capitalism works. Like, people are free to be who they want to be as long as it's legal and moral. Like, like, for example, if, let's say, for example, you have, a guy that goes to college and he wants to study business and he wants to open his own company. Okay, that's good. That's fine. But let's say you have a guy, I'm just making this up. Let's say you have a guy that joins the military because he just wants to kill as many people as he can. That is very disturbed thinking, and that person should never be in the military. He should never own a gun because you do not join the military just for the sole purpose of killing people. You join the military to serve and protect your country. Like that, there's a, how to describe this? I would say, I'll word it this way. Whenever someone joins the military, it should be because they have a profound love and respect for their country. And that's why they want to defend, protect, and honor their country. So it's not about them doing what they want. It's about doing what's best for the country, but within the realms of the military. So, there's a difference in the intention and what's behind the intention. You know what I mean? So it's, some things are legal, some things are not legal. Some things are moral, some things are not moral. So just FYI, be aware of that. But anyway, I think it's one of those things that we do need to be aware more of these federal agencies. And from what I can tell with this one, it doesn't seem bad. I haven't found their budget yet. I think they do a lot of good. I haven't seen anything bad. I just hope and pray that they are not like the EPA and that they don't have a huge budget and that they are not interfering with people's lives. Because one of the things that concerns me with federal agencies, as usual, is if they get too big for their britches and then the way that they think their work should be implemented is just to interfere with everyday people's lives, like just bothering citizens. And that's not the purpose of government. Not at all, because we, the citizens, are the ones who are paying their wages. Like, the government reports to us, we don't report to them. So this is why we go over these federal agencies, because you'd be surprised how many people work for the federal government, have a federal job, are federal employees, and get federal benefits. And some of them are unionized. I don't know if these are, or if this particular agency is with their workers. But, let me put it this way, and I'll close with this. We do have a lot of federal agencies. Some are needed, some are not. But, some federal agencies they do a lot of good that we don't hear about. And I think that's a mistake. And you're probably thinking, wow, is she turning pro-government? No, I'm not. I'm for small government, not big government. But I think the American people, we need to be aware of what every single one of these federal agencies does. Because we're paying for this stuff. And we need to know, okay, who's in charge of these agencies? And what do they do for our country? Like what do they do for the environment, and what do they do for the common good? Meaning, what do they do that is a service for everyone? Meaning, it's not nepotism, it's not favoritism. And see, that's the thing about the federal government. Our federal government at this point in time is just riddled with nepotism and favoritism and just bizarre ways of thinking, and that is not appropriate for any type of government system, especially our federal government here in the United States. I'm not surprised when there's favoritism outside the United States in other countries, but within our country, I am surprised by that because, we have equality here I was going to say here in Oklahoma. That's a joke. We have equality here in the United States. So no citizen is better than another citizen, but that doesn't mean that we should all work the same job, make the same kind of money. That's not it. Because if everybody is exactly the same, we're all cookie cutter, then we actually lose our freedoms and we're not equal anymore. We're just drones. What makes it important here in the United States is that we know and understand what exactly our government is doing, especially in these agencies that no one really knows about. I mean, I'll just say straight up, there are so many agencies that we have discussed in this podcast. Number one, I never knew existed. Number two, I never knew what they did. And number three, I wasn't really sure what to make of them. Most of the federal agencies that we have gone over, especially the big ones, I'm just shocked at how much money they waste, how much money they spend. And it's like, you know what? The reason why a lot of these federal agencies get away with overspending so much money is because there's not accountability. And unfortunately, that's our fault. That's our fault as the American people, and also it's the Congress's fault because Congress has the power of the purse. So for me, I very much enjoy going over these different federal agencies and looking at these things because you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with workers' rights? Here's the thing, everything. Because here's the thing, what's interesting here is that the larger our federal government gets, the less workers' rights are available, or the less our workers' rights are being protected in the private sector because the public sector is getting so large, so big, overinflated, that the federal government thinks it's too big to fail. And that's not true. It can fail any time. I don't want it to fail, but the bigger your government gets, the more there's a tipping point that goes towards communism and socialism. It starts out as socialism, and then it quickly rolls down the hill, it snowballs into communism. So the larger your government gets, like for example, with these agencies, the less workers' rights we have because a lot of these agencies, they try and control the private sector. And they have no right to do that. Can they implement laws and statutes? Sure. If it's to protect things, if it's for a legal and moral, I would say, cause, and it's implemented in a normal, legalistic manner that's not meant to burden the people, then I'm all for these agencies. But if they get too big for their britches and they're causing more problems than actually doing good, we've got some problems there. An example of this is the EPA. And there are a couple other agencies I was thinking of, but we go over these federal agencies because we want to make sure that there's a checks and balance system within our federal government. Because the last thing we want is for every job in the United States to be controlled by the federal government. But that is exactly what progressives and liberals and Democrats want. They want a big government because they want a big old fat nanny state. And here's the thing. If you have a nanny state, your government's going to be fat as a tick with money, but you're not going to get that money. Examples of this is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, our VA, and several other systems, or programs, I should say. So we need to be careful not to allow our federal government to become a big old fat tick, but also we need to make sure that the agencies that we do have that do good work, that that we not burden them with things that they don't need to be handling. I think sometimes federal agencies, they take on more than they can chew, and I think that causes a problem. I really do. And I'm not saying I'm for federal agencies. I'm not for them or against them per se. I'm not trying to throw them a bone here. I'm just saying that sometimes federal agencies take on too much, and then no wonder it fails. See, there are so many things that we, the American people, we need to handle in our lives, because it's our responsibility to be good citizens and to be successful and financially stable adults. It is not the responsibility of the federal government or the state government. It is our responsibility. And if anything, back in the day, it used to be considered an honor to be financially independent and secure and to take care of yourself. Now, it's like, oh, you don't want money from the government? Are you crazy? Why aren't you taking that check from the government? It's like, here's the thing. Whenever you take a check from the government, you're taking a check from someone's paycheck in the private sector. Like, you're taking money from them. And here's the thing. How's that any different than these high-up execs that get overpaid for work they didn't do, and they take credit away from the underlings, the underpaid workers? How is that any different? See, if we're going to say that what these higher-up execs are doing is wrong, then on this show, and I would hope in this society, we would call a spade and say, hey, then the federal government can't do that either. Because the federal government is not the solution, it's the problem. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a federal government. We should have a federal government. What I'm talking about is that we need to be more fiscally responsible as individuals, so that way it actually promotes the strength of our government. Because whenever your citizens are more stable, especially financially, and also from a security point of view, like for example, like I hope and pray that our southern border, I wish we had a wall, because China has a wall. Why can't we have one? We need one. We have way too many people coming into this country illegally. It's bizarre. But here's the thing. Whenever your citizens are more financially stable, they're more financially successful, and they're more secure and safe, that actually helps to promote and stabilize your government. See, the power is with the people, not with the government, because we, the people, are the government. Let me get another drink of water. Hold on just a moment. See, here's the thing. Every country on the face of this earth needs and should have a government in place, because you have to have laws. You have to have laws to create stability within your country. You can't just throw everything out the window. Just because something offends you or bothers you, well, grow up. Like, there are so many things I do not like about living in an at-will state, but there are so many things that I love about where I live. And if anything, I make it a point to purposely find things I like about where I'm from, where I live, and what good can I do in my community. Because if all I ever do is focus on what I don't like, what I can't stand, it's going to lead to a very miserable life. And I think that goes for anyone and everyone that lives that way. You have to find the good. And here's the thing. It is possible to have a good government, but it needs to be small. It needs to be regulated, and there needs to be a checks and balance system. Because the last thing I want is to have no government at all and everything just be guerrilla warfare on so many fronts. I mean, if you want to dethrone your government, just look at all the crazy countries right now that are completely financially unstable. And I tend to go towards things that are financially unstable to use examples, because whenever there is financial instability, it's chaos. There's always chaos, because the citizens do not have access to food, water, and shelter. See, here's the thing. That's why I commonly say, or frequently say, the best societies are those that do have a government. It's limited. But more importantly, the citizens are financially stable and financially successful, meaning they have it all on their own. They don't need government assistance. And there are those that, they may be disabled, which I pray that they are healed. And, there's some people that they do need some assistance. But not everybody needs assistance. In fact, the majority of people just need to be rich. I wish everybody was rich. I wish everybody was financially stable and successful, because then people, first of all, would be a whole lot happier. They would not look to the government to pay their bills. And I think people would be more knowledgeable about the economy, and they would understand currency and the banking system a whole lot better than what's going on right now. See, because here's the thing, when you're rich and you're financially successful, sure, tough times come along, but, you may not like it, nobody does, but you don't fall apart, you don't fall to pieces just because there's inflation or something. See, the richer you are and the more stable you are, the more financially stable you are, the easier it is to ride things out through the storm. Instead of freaking out about the storm, you just roll up your sails and you just let the wind take you to a better place. You just let the wind take you away from the storm. See, when you are more financially stable and more financially successful, tough times don't hinder you. You notice them, but they don't bother you and they don't stop you from living your life. It's just the opposite for people who are financially unstable and financially unsuccessful. See, the financially unstable and unsuccessful, they go to government all the time for a handout. And I understand why. I totally get it. They're scared. They need access to food, water, and shelter and all these things, and they're really concerned about rent, their mortgage, their kids, schools. I mean, you name it, it's a burden. But here's the thing. That mindset needs to change. Instead of thinking like a poor person, you need to think like a rich person. Because when you're rich, tough stuff just rolls right off your back. You're like, I acknowledge it, I understand it, but it's not going to stop me from being successful. I would rather have everybody in the United States think like that than run to the government for a paycheck or for some kind of welfare program. See, because here's the thing. Welfare programs do not work. They don't work. And here's why. They keep the poor poor and they overtax the rich. It would be better if the rich were not overtaxed and they had that extra money to hire these people, employ them that need a handout, get them a really good job, help them make like 75 or 85K a year, then they won't need to be on any government welfare program. And then, maybe someday they could own their own company and be super rich. See, here's the thing. That's how people used to think in this country. When the United States was more Christian, when we honored God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and we actually believed in the goodness of God, we didn't just go along with theology or indoctrinations or cults or, what some stupid priest says because he's supposedly holier than the rest of us, which he's not. Because when you are a believer in Christ Jesus, we are all vicars of Christ. It's not just someone wearing a fancy robe. See, here's the thing. When you're Christ-like and you're a Christian, and when you believe in the goodness of God and you haven't been brainwashed by these bad people, you know that tough times are an opportunity to do amazingly well because you're not going to be hindered by fear or anger or rage or the economy. You know that God is going to take care of you. I love being around people that even though their life may be tough, they're like, hey, I'm not worried about it. I'm concerned, but I know that I'm in the palm of God's hand. He's got this. And that may drive some people nuts. And here's the thing, you don't have to know the answer to everything to do well. So stop overworking yourself. Stop thinking, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. Oh man, if I want to retire, I've got to do this. Pump the brake, take a deep breath, and take all of your problems, your issues to God. And don't ever say, if it be your will. I hate that word if. It should be banned from the English language. Here's the thing. If God be for you, who dare be against you? So when you're praying to God, you need to say, God, I need help with this. I give it to you, and I know you're going to help me. That's a wonderful prayer. Now look at it from the opposite point of view. Lord, I've got this going on. If it be your will, help me. That creates doubt, because then you're not really confident that he is going to help you. Because you're saying, well, if it be your will, it is his will. Read the Bible. This country used to worship the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Joshua. We used to believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, like all across the board. And you know what? When we believed in God, we put our faith in God, not in our government. Because God, how do I describe this? Your government is not your God. Whenever you make government your God, you now officially have communism. And communism is a horrible way to live. And if you don't know the history of communist China or the Soviet Union, please read it. Find a good book, preferably like an encyclopedia type, because they just say it like it is. They don't slant it one way or the other. And let me know what you think about the history of the Soviet Union. Message me anytime. You can message me on this podcast. You can also message me on YouTube. You can go to some of our YouTube videos. Message me. You can also email me, yourlaborlaws@gmail.com. Let me know what you think about the history of the Soviet Union, because if this country does not straighten up and start believing more in God and less in government, we are headed towards communism. Especially with the current regime that is in power, which is the Biden administration, which I think is very sad, because I think back in the day when he was younger, he actually had some really good ideas. Even though he's a Democrat, he had some really good ideas when he's younger, but now he's just a puppet because he's mentally inept. Like, I don't even know how he's walking and talking. I mean, I pray for our president. I just don't think he's that good of a leader because he's not really healthy, unfortunately. But anyway, let me know what you think about that stuff. Because it's important to be aware of what is going on in your country, because, you cannot take a vacation from what is your reality. If you don't like what is going on in your world, in your sector, in your society, you know what? Be a cause for good. It's like I said, we all stand for something. We might as well stand for what is good. Because whether you recognize it or not, all of us has a belief system. So we might as well believe in the goodness of God and know that He is good and true, and He is taking care of us every day of our life. I will go ahead and end this podcast, but as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye. Oh, and Happy New Year. Bye-bye.